Inside Lurigancho, Peru's overcrowded hell. How gangs run the largest prison. Subscribe before you blink, because this is the kind of story governments bury, the kind of hell you'll wish you'd never stepped inside. Like, comment, and share if you want the truth that lives behind the bars of Lurigancho. Sirens wailed against the dusty dawn of Lima's outskirts as Inspector Daniela Paredes' unmarked van jolted over potholes toward a crumbling wall. On paper, Lurigancho Prison was designed for 2,500 inmates. In reality, more than 10,000 men were crammed behind its gates, ruled not by guards, but by an invisible government of gang delegados. Daniela had spent 3 years trying to pierce that world. Now she was being driven through the gates in the aftermath of a murder so brazen it had stunned even hardened prosecutors. Hours earlier, a body had been dumped outside the prison's infirmary, a young informant named Cesar Munoz. He had been part of a quiet police initiative to map the extortion networks running out of Lurigancho. His throat was slit, but what chilled Daniela wasn't the death. It was the note pinned to his chest. Next, the inspector. As the van rolled into the yard, the soundscape shifted. It wasn't the clang of cell doors, but the thrum of commerce. Men hawking cigarettes, barbers snipping hair, a soccer game in full swing. Above it all hung a sweet, acrid smell, fried food, sweat, and the unmistakable tang of chemical solvents from clandestine drug labs hidden behind shops. Guards loitered at the edges, rifles slung but eyes averted. Everyone knew the real power lay deeper inside. A wiry inmate in a crisp white shirt stepped forward as if greeting a guest. Tattoos curled up his neck like ivy. "Delegado Luis," whispered the driver, one of the prison's 3 main bosses. Luis extended his hand, smiling. "Welcome, Inspector," he said, "and we've prepared everything for your investigation." Daniela didn't shake his hand. "Where was Munoz killed?" she asked. Luis's smile didn't falter. "Inside, outside, does it matter?" He knew the rules. They led her through a labyrinth of corridors lined with improvised cells, gambling tables, and tiny shrines. The further she went, the more it felt like a city rather than a prison, a city built on hierarchy and fear. Murals of saints shared wall space with gang insignias. In a corner, a teenage inmate stirred a pot of chemicals under a makeshift hood, eyes darting nervously. Daniela took mental notes: the position of guards, the smell of solvents, the locations of cameras. Her partner, a forensic tech named Javier, trailed behind, snapping covert photos with a hidden button camera. They were supposed to be in and out within an hour, but the deeper they went, the less she believed they'd leave on schedule. They reached the infirmary where Munoz's body had been found. The tile was still slick. A crude mop leaned against the wall. No one met her eyes. She crouched, examining a faint smear of blue ink on the floor, the same color as the note pinned to Munoz. "They cleaned the blood, but not the message," she murmured. Javier bent close. "That's from a ballpoint," he whispered. "Prison issue." Before she could respond, a loudspeaker crackled overhead. A voice boomed in Spanish, naming visitors and codes. Daniela didn't recognize the sequence. Around them, inmates stiffened, then began moving. Not running, but shifting, like a tide turning. Luis's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then at her. "We'll have to cut this short," he said. Daniela's instincts screamed, "What's happening?" Luis spread his hands. "Nothing you can't handle." But she noticed 2 of his men quietly closing doors along the corridor, sealing off exits. Javier's hand twitched toward his hidden red audio. No signal. They were being boxed in. Daniela turned back toward the infirmary. A thin door at the rear stood ajar. She slipped through before Luis could stop her. Javier followed. They found themselves in a narrow passage lit by a single bare bulb. The walls were damp, graffiti covered. At the far end, a metal gate barred the way, and beyond it she glimpsed something impossible. A full-scale workshop with benches, cash-counting machines, and stacks of cell phones. Men moved quickly, stuffing documents into duffel bags. Javier hissed, "That's the hub, the extortion center." Daniela snapped photos until a shadow loomed at the gate. A man in a black hoodie, face hidden, slid a thick envelope through the bars. "For you, Inspector," he said. His voice was calm. "Proof." She picked it up. Inside were photocopies of ledgers showing names. Politicians, police commanders, bank accounts. Her own name appeared on one page with a large question mark. She felt the floor tilt. The man in the hoodie spoke again. "They're watching. You need to leave now." "Who are you?" she demanded. "Someone who's already dead," he replied. Before she could press him, the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the passage. Shouts erupted back in the infirmary. Metal slammed against metal. Javier fumbled for his flashlight. A single gunshot cracked, echoing down the corridor. Daniela's heart hammered. She stuffed the envelope into her vest. "Back to the van," she hissed. They turned, but the way they'd come was blocked. A silhouette stood in the doorway, the glow of a cigarette tip burning like an ember. "You should have shaken my hand," Luis said quietly. Then the glow vanished and the sound of a bolt sliding home echoed like a gunshot. They were trapped inside Lurigancho, holding evidence that could topple half of Lima's political elite, and everyone in the prison now knew it. The corridor smelled of damp concrete and panic. Daniela's fingers grazed the cold wall, her pulse hammering in her ears. Somewhere above them, Lurigancho's yard still throbbed with the noise of a city within walls, but down here the air felt vacuum-sealed. Only Javier's ragged breathing and the soft drip of water echoed in the dark. She flicked on her phone's flashlight. The beam found Luis's cigarette butt still glowing on the floor where he had dropped it. Beyond, the passage was empty, but the sound of sliding bolts and murmured orders traveled along the pipes overhead. They weren't alone. Javier leaned close. "They've cut off the exits. If they find us with that envelope, we're already dead," she finished. Her hand brushed the envelope in her vest, thick with names and numbers. The question mark scrawled beside her own name burned in her mind. Who had put it there? Why? A faint light glimmered from the far end of the passage. Daniela moved toward it, each step slow and deliberate. The metal gate that had separated them from the hidden workshop now stood ajar. The men she had seen earlier were gone, leaving only scattered papers and a humming generator. She stepped inside. The workshop smelled of ink and solvent. Crates of cell phones lay half-packed beside printers churning out fake ID cards. On a desk sat a stack of SIM cards bound with rubber bands. Javier picked one up, turning it over in his palm. "They're running entire extortion networks from here," he whispered. "Hundreds of numbers." Daniela's eyes landed on a small laptop still open on a chat screen. Messages scrolled past in real time. Payments, threats, instructions. One line made her stomach clench. "Munoz taken care of. Next target, DP." She scrolled up. DP repeated in several threads. Her initials. They had known she was coming long before she arrived. Behind them, footsteps. Soft but deliberate. Daniela spun, flashlight cutting across the doorway. A young inmate stood there, hands raised. His eyes were wide, his voice trembling. "You need to move," he said. "They're coming." "Who are you?" she demanded. "I'm Cesar's brother," he whispered. "He tried to help you. They killed him for it." Daniela's throat tightened. "Why warn me?" "Because I don't want to die in here," he said. "There's a tunnel under the kitchen. It's how they move drugs out. You can escape before they close it." Javier hissed. "We can't trust him." "We don't have a choice," Daniela replied. They followed the boy through a maze of back corridors. The prison above roared like an ocean. Whistles, metal doors, shouted orders. Down here, the sound grew muffled, like moving under a heavy blanket. At last they emerged into a storage room filled with sacks of rice and barrels of cooking oil. The boy knelt, pried up a loose tile, and revealed a narrow stairwell plunging into darkness. "Go," he urged. Daniela hesitated. "Come with us." He shook his head. "They'll know I helped you. Maybe this buys me time." He pressed a USB stick into her palm. Everything from the laptop. Names, accounts. But be careful. Some of your own are on it. Then he vanished back into the shadows before she could stop him. Daniela and Javier descended the stairwell. The air grew colder, rank with sewage and fuel. At the bottom, they found a tunnel lined with rough brick, wide enough for 2 people. Wooden crates lined the walls. A faint breeze blew from the far end, carrying the smell of wet earth and freedom. They started down the tunnel. Their footsteps echoed. Javier clutched his camera to his chest. "This is insane," he whispered. "It's like a city under the city." "It's a country under a country," Daniela said. "A shadow government." They turned a corner and froze. Ahead, silhouettes moved, flashlights slicing through the dark. Voices barked in Spanish. Luis's men. They had found the tunnel. Daniela yanked Javier into a side alcove, heart pounding. The men passed within meters, rifles slung, searching. One of them spoke into a radio. "The inspector is in the tunnel. Seal the kitchen exit." When their footsteps faded, Daniela pulled Javier Foe, roared again. They ran bent low, the tunnel ceiling scraping their backs. At last they saw daylight ahead, a metal grate at the end of the passage. Beyond it lay the outer wall, a drainage ditch, and the dusty hills of Lima. She shoved at the grate. It didn't budge. Rust and concrete held it fast. Javier joined her, straining. The metal groaned. "Hurry!" he gasped. Footsteps thundered behind them. Shouts. The tunnel filled with moving shadows. Daniela's fingers found a loose bolt. She ripped it free, tearing her knuckles. The grate shifted. She pushed harder, and it swung open just as a gunshot cracked, the bullet sparking off the wall beside her head. They tumbled out into the drainage ditch, rolling in the dust. Javier scrambled up, pulling her after him. Behind them, the tunnel mouth glowed with flashlights and gun barrels. They ran for the hills, lungs burning. Bullets kicked up dirt at their heels. Sirens wailed from the prison, mingling with the shouts of thousands of men as news of the chase spread through Lurigancho like wildfire. They reached a stand of scrub trees and collapsed. Daniela clutched the USB stick in her palm. It felt heavier than a weapon. "We can't go back to headquarters," Javier panted. "You saw the names. They'll kill us before we get there." Daniela stared at the prison, its sprawling complex a living organism pulsing under the morning sun. She had come for an informant's murder. She had stumbled onto a state within a state. "We're not going back," she said softly. "We're going public." Javier turned to her. "With who?" "Everyone's bought." She opened her phone. No signal. She closed her eyes, thinking. "There's a journalist in Miraflores. He's been trying to expose Lurigancho for years. If we can reach him." The sound of engines cut her off. Pickup trucks were coming down the dirt road from the highway, dust plumes rising behind them. Not police. The wrong color vehicles, no markings. Men with rifles in the beds. "They're not going to let us leave," Javier said. Daniela shoved the USB stick into her boot and grabbed his arm. "Then we don't leave the same way. We go through the canal to the shanty town. If we can lose them in the alleys." They slipped down into a dry canal lined with garbage and crawled on hands and knees as the trucks approached. Voices shouted in Spanish, searching. Dogs barked. They crawled until the canal widened into a storm drain. It stank of rot and sewage, but led toward the outskirts. Daniela's mind raced. Someone inside had given her the files. Someone outside had ordered her death. And somewhere above them, 10,000 men lived under the rule of gang delegates, as if the state had ceased to exist. Javier whispered, "If they catch us." "They won't," she said, but she didn't believe it. The storm drain opened into a ravine behind a row of abandoned warehouses. Daniela helped Javier climb out. The city sprawled below, gray and endless. Somewhere in that maze was a chance to survive, to tell the world what Lurigancho really was. She turned back toward the prison one last time. On a rooftop far in the distance, she could see a tiny figure watching them through binoculars. Luis. He raised his hand in a slow, mocking wave. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. Behind them, an engine roared to life inside one of the warehouses. A black SUV rolled out slowly, blocking their path. Daniela tightened her grip on Javier's arm. "Run," she whispered. They bolted toward the narrow alleys beyond the warehouses as the SUV accelerated, tires spitting gravel. The USB stick dug into her ankle with each step, a reminder of the proof she carried and the price it would exact. The alley narrowed to a throat of corrugated tin and stacked pallets. Daniela's feet slid on crushed glass as the SUV fishtailed into the mouth of the lane, bumper nudging trash cans aside with a hollow scrot. Pee! She yanked Javier down behind a rusted drum, the metal cold against her cheek. Diesel fumes blew past in a choking gust. Voices, 3, maybe 4, spilled from the open windows in quick, clipped orders. "Abri, aber, don't let them turn east." Javier swallowed a whimper. His shirt clung to his back, damp with dust and fear. Somewhere, a stray dog barked once and fell silent, as if the entire shantytown had ducked and held its breath. "Left," Daniela mouthed. They slid along the wall and darted through a gap in a fence where the wire had been peeled back like skin. On the other side, a yard opened onto a patchwork of laundry lines and cinder-block rooms, the air buzzing with flies and the smell of hot oil. A woman frying yuca blinked at them. A long, slow blink of someone who has seen this kind of fear sprint through her yard before, and pointed with her chin toward a set of broken stairs. "Gracias," Daniela breathed, and they ran. The stairs led to a low rooftop of baked tar. Lima unspooled in every direction, a muted quilt of concrete and dust under a high white sun. Behind them, doors slammed, boots hammered. A man shouted, "Arriba! Arriba!" The rooftop shuddered under the thud of bodies. Daniela grabbed the lip of a neighboring roof and heaved herself across the gap. For a split second, her boots found nothing. Then the ball of her foot caught gravel, and she rolled, shoulder taking the brunt. Pain shot down her arm. "Javi!" she called, reaching back. He leapt. His heel clipped the edge, he flailed, and she seized his wrist hard enough to bruise. Together they tumbled to the far side, the roof gravel biting into their palms. A bullet punched the tar where his head had been, flicking a pebble into the air like a flea. Another hit the metal duct with a singing ping. They ran again, roof to roof, until the buildings fell apart into a wider drop they couldn't clee. Our below lay a narrow street clogged with moto taxis and a stalled bus coughing black smoke. A boy looked up from a crate of bootleg DVDs, saw the guns behind them, and melted into an open doorway without a sound. "Down," Daniela said. They climbed a ladder that hadn't been safe 20 years earlier and dropped into the street. A moto driver with a skull bandana revved his engine and jerked his chin. Daniela didn't hesitate. They straddled the seat, Javier clutching her waist, and the moto screamed forward, parting the traffic like a knife. The SUV couldn't follow. It ground its gears against the jam and vanished behind a curtain of honks and curses. Wind tore tears from Daniela's eyes. She inhaled diesel, frying fish, hot rubber. The USB stick pressed a dull rectangle into her ankle. She pictured the names etched inside it: judges, police commanders, ministers, and the thin black question mark scrawled beside her own initials in the ledger from the workshop. Who had doubted her? Who had floated her name for sale? They skidded into the bustle of a market, vendors shouting over pyramids of mango and ceramic saints. The driver cut the engine and tapped his helmet. Hasta aquí. He wasn't asking. No one wanted to wear the smoke of what chased them. Daniela paid with the last bills in her pocket and tugged Javier into the shade of a tarp. Morning had hardened into noon. Sweat traced a line down her spine. A busker's flute threaded the air, sweet and piercing, and for a heartbeat the market felt normal, like life pressed forward no matter who lived or died in the shadows. "Now what?" Javier asked, voice frayed. "Miraflores," she said. "The journalist. How? We can't walk half the city." "We won't." She scanned the street. A battered blue Colectivo idled at the curb, its side painted with a route Daniela knew too well from childhood visits to the city: San Juan, Centro, Miraflores. She pulled Javier aboard and kept their heads down as the microbus rattled into motion, its speakers hissing a romantic ballad. The city slid by and a weight settled in Daniela's chest. "He's in there." "That means he's marked," Gonzalo said softly. "He helped you against a machine that eats its own." A low thud came from the hallway, the kind of gentle bump a shoulder makes when testing a door. They froze. Another bump. Then quiet. Gonzalo reached for the bat propped behind his desk, fingers white on the handle. Daniela motioned him back and peered through the peephole. An older woman with grocery bags wrestled her key. Relief made Daniela dizzy. She stepped away and paused. The building's front door downstairs clicked open, cheerful as a tongue against teeth. Voices filled the stairwell. Heavy boots, weight carried like authority. Not police she trusted. That other tone, that patient arrogance of men who never feared consequence. "They found us," she said. "How?" Javier whispered. Gonzalo didn't answer. He was already unplugging the USB stick, copying files to an emergency drive he wore around his neck. "There's a back stairwell to the garage. My car." "Too obvious," Daniela said. "They'll have someone on it." The boots reached the landing below. A male voice murmured into a radio. "Departamento 502." Her stomach dropped. They had her exact door. Gonzalo opened a narrow wardrobe and shoved aside coats. Behind them, a square of drywall protruded half an inch. He dug his fingers into the seam and peeled it away to reveal a hollow lined with older plaster, the bones of an earlier remodel. Inside, a vent shaft rose, thick with dust. "My landlord's secret," Gonzalo said wryly, for when his wife visited. He coughed. "It runs to the roof." The boots stopped outside. A knuckle rapped politely. Then, "Señor Rivas, open, please." "Go," Gonzalo whispered. "What about you?" Daniela asked. He smiled, crooked and tired. "I'm good at buying time. Gonza, go." He shoved them into the shaft and slid. She wanted to rip the TV off the wall and smash it onto the sidewalk. "Here," Javier gasped, tugging her into the cafe bathroom. The mirror on the back wall fractured their faces into tired shards. He pulled open the back of her boot with clumsy fingers. Daniela slid out the USB and stared at it. That unremarkable piece of plastic swollen with secrets. "We need a place to upload," Javier said. "Somewhere off-net, somewhere they don't own." Daniela thought of every newsroom she had ever trusted, every person whose handshake had reassured her, and then thought of the boy in the tunnel who had said, "Be careful, some of your own are on it." She pictured Munoz with the note pinned to his chest. She pictured Gonzalo's crooked smile as the door crashed in. "Not a newsroom," she said. "A church." 10 minutes later, they slipped into a cool nave smelling of wax and stone. Candles guttered in red glass cups. A woman knelt with her face in her hands. An old priest in a threadbare cassock swept stray petals from the aisle with a straw broom. He looked up as they approached, and something like recognition moved through his eyes. Lima is a city of faces and whispers. Secrets have their own parishes. "You were the girl who came for the fishermen when the port cops took their boat," he said to Daniela, and she remembered in a flash. She had been 23, furious, unstoppable. The priest had signed the affidavit when no one would. "Padre," she said, "we need a room and a cord." He led them to a tiny office behind the sacristy. A dot matrix printer slept under a cloth. A computer from another decade hummed beside a modem that looked like a toy. It shouldn't have worked, and yet, when he plugged a long Ethernet cable into a jack labeled Caritas, the screen found a heartbeat. "You have 5, maybe 10 minutes," he said. "Then someone smarter than me will notice. Use them well." They slipped out a side gate into a lane that ran toward the cliffs. The ocean spread below like tarnished silver. The air cleared in her lungs. For the first time since dawn, the world smelled like salt. At the overlook, tourists held phones to the wind and laughed. Couples took selfies with the Pacific behind them. A paraglider cut a smooth arc along the lip of the cliff, its canopy bright against the haze. Life, indifferent, moving forward. Javier leaned on the railing, shoulders shaking. "We did it," he said. "Danny, we did it." She wanted to say yes. She wanted the word like water, but her phone buzzed in her pocket, a number she didn't know. She answered without thinking, opened her mouth to speak, and froze. A familiar voice breathed into her ear, calm, patient, the voice of a man for whom distance and walls meant nothing. "Inspector Paredes," Luis said. "Congratulations, a brave upload. I'm almost impressed." Her blood ran cold. He shouldn't have had the number. He shouldn't have had the tone of someone standing close enough to see the brand of your cigarette. "You can't stop it," she said. "It's out." "Oh, I won't try," he said. "That's not my job anymore." What does that mean? He chuckled as if she had finally asked the right question. Do you know how a machine like ours survives? It adapts. You've shifted the balance, Inspector. The delegates will go. Others will step in. But the structure remains. The tentacles change hands, not shape. She stared at the horizon where the ocean met sky in a thin, paled seam. Who? In the pause, gulls screamed and a bus sighed and a balloon drifted above the park with a brand's name on it like a prayer. Look at your file, he said. Look at the question mark. They weren't asking if you were dirty. They were asking if you were recruitable. A softness crept into his voice that made her skin go cold. Somebody? You erased the mark an hour ago. Somebody in your own office. A courtesy. A welcome. The line clicked dead. She stared at the screen. It was blank and clean, a slab of glass reflecting her own face, dusty and drawn. She pictured headquarters, a hallway slick with wax, a coffee machine burbling like a laugh. She pictured the chief's door. She pictured, with a clarity that made her jaw clench, whose hand would be on its knob when she pushed it open. Javier saw her expression and knew. We can't go back. No, she said. We go forward. To where? To everyone. They walked to the stone benches along the cliff and sat, just two tired people in a city of 10 million, indistinguishable in the sun. The Pacific smoldered. Notifications began to ping on her phone. First one, then braided, then a flood. Journalists writing back, the attorney in Madrid calling the hour historic, a human rights account posting a thread, a broadcaster requesting comment, a clip of Gonzalo Rivas's battered face appearing on a live stream from a hospital bed with the caption, Sigan la historia, follow the story. Tears pinched Daniela's eyes and went unshed. She typed until her thumb cramped. Statements, bullet points, verified lines only. She sent the photo of the ledger's page with the names blurred except for the header, Delegado Structure. She sent the map of the tunnel under the infirmary. She sent a still frame of the workshop that looked like any office until you saw the cash counting machines and the stacks of SIM cards winking in their trays like teeth. When she finally lifted her head, the sky had bleached to a paler blue. The city sounded louder, police sirens to the south, distant chants to the north. A wave rolled in and collapsed against the cliff, white and useless. Her phone buzzed again, a new message from an unknown address. She almost ignored it, and then she saw the attachment, a photo taken minutes earlier, grainy, low angle from somewhere behind them. Two figures on a bench, heads bent over a phone, she and Javier. The caption, No corran, ya los vemos. Don't run, we already see you. Javier read it over her shoulder and went very still. Where? She scanned the park, families, uniforms, sunglasses, every face an ordinary life. Every ordinary life a perfect place to hide a watchful eye. Everywhere, she said quietly. A woman pushing a stroller slowed. Perdón, she said, gentle, and kept going. A teen on a skateboard rolled past and popped his tail, smiling. Daniela slid the phone into her pocket and stood. She turned to Javier, to the ocean, to the city. This is how it ends, she said, not with an arrest, with a light. He looked at her. You think it's enough? No, she said, but it's a start. They walked away from the bench and the cliff and the paragliders and the woman with the stroller and the teen with the skateboard and the man on the folding chair on a distant roof. They walked back into the city that had taught them how to hide and how to see. The notifications on her phone kept coming, thousands of them, multiplying like fish. Somewhere, departments opened files because the world was looking. Somewhere, a prisoner in Lurigancho heard the hissed rumor that the story had left the walls and gone into the air. Somewhere, a boy who had given them a USB stick and refused to flee measured his remaining hours against the weight of what he had done and decided he would not beg. At a crosswalk, the light changed from red to green, and the stream of people moved, and Daniela moved with them. She felt, for the first time that day, that the city belonged to all of them again. if only for a minute stretched thin and bright. They passed a street vendor who had a TV wedged into his stall, its color turned too high. A presenter in a pale suit said the word Lurigancho with a gravity that had been missing that morning. Graphics spun, delegados, red de extortion, documentos filtrados. The vendor looked at Danny. Ella and blinked, then looked back at the screen. Recognition trembled in his mouth and didn't climb out. He said nothing. He poured her a cup of chicha morada and pushed it across the counter like a blessing. Gracias, she said. He nodded. Siguen. Keep going. By dusk, the hashtags churned, and the first official denial posted, and then a second, more careful statement that promised a full and transparent investigation. Javier laughed once, harsh, and then didn't laugh again. They ducked into a cheap hostel and paid cash for a room with a squeaking fan and a window that looked onto nothing. They ate from plastic containers and said very little. The city hummed through the wall like a far-off engine. When sleep finally climbed over Daniela like a heavy coat, it brought images that weren't dreams so much as replays. Munoz's still face, the ledger's question mark, the boys shaking hands, Gonzalo's crooked smile, Luis's voice curling down the line like smoke. The tentacles change hands, not shape. Before dawn, she woke to a quiet she didn't trust. She sat on the edge of the bed and watched the room turn from charcoal to dull silver. The fan ticked. The world held, waiting. Her phone vibrated. One message. A single line. No name. 3 months from now, check the river behind the courthouse. She stared at it until the words blurred. She thought of the template of endings inside every case file. Things tied off with string, press conferences, medals. She thought of the example in the manual that said the killer was behind bars. And then 3 months later, another body. She stood and reached for her boots. Javier squinted at her from the other bed. It's not over, he said. It never is, she answered. She tied her laces tight, shoved the USB's empty shell into her pocket, and headed for the door. If you think this one was intense, she said over her shoulder, her voice low and steady, you're not ready for the next.